So welcome everyone to this month's Understanding ADHD Speaker Series event, hosted by the ADHD Empowerment Meetup community and the nonprofit Children and Adults with ADHD, or CHAD for short, of San Fernando Valley, Los Angeles. I'm Suzanne Sophos, our executive director. I'm also an adult with ADHD and mom to a fourth grader with ADHD. Tonight, I'm joined, I think, maybe in a minute or two, by my co-host, Yulia. She's an executive function coach and an adult with ADHD. And if you need anything during the meeting or have questions, feel free to direct message either one of us. If you're new and this is your first event with us, please let us know in the chat so we can welcome you. You're all welcome to introduce yourselves to one another in the chat. We'd love to see who's joining us this evening. CHAD has been hosting this speaker series for the last 6 years, bringing in experts on the topics of ADHD directly to the community. This event is just a part of our work to educate, support, and advocate for adults and children living with ADHD. We also host online peer support groups for adults with ADHD, young women with ADHD, and parents of ADHD children. We also have a weekly co-working and body doubling group, as well as an ADHD media discussion group. All of our groups are facilitated by our dedicated volunteers, and all of our work is funded by donations. Our mission is to ensure that everyone who needs ADHD education and support can receive it, regardless of finances. So there's never a fee to attend our events. However, we are a nonprofit organization and our survival depends upon donations and membership fees. So we kindly ask that if you're able and you find our work worthwhile, you consider making a $5 or $10 donation tonight to help support our work. I'd like to share a few meeting guidelines with everyone, just so you guys can understand how the meeting runs. Tonight, we're going to do things a little bit different. Usually we have a slide presentation, but tonight Rick and I are going to chat. Rick is our guest. I'll introduce him in a sec. We're going to chat. So please keep your audio muted. You can use the chat feature at any time throughout the meeting to share your thoughts, resources, ask questions of other people. Please just be respectful. And if you would like to direct message someone, please ask their consent. Let's see, during the Q&A portion of the evening, which is pretty much going to be all night long tonight, you can type your questions in the chat, and we will do our best to get to as many of them as we can. Let's see. So before we dive in, I like to start with just a quick evidence-based overview of what ADHD is and how it impacts individuals. ADHD is a lifelong neurobiological condition. It impairs the brain's executive functions as well as delays social emotional development. Executive function skills, which I'll explain in more detail in just a sec, are vital for getting anything done. All this leads to the hallmark challenge of ADHD, which is trouble self-regulating and self-managing. Individuals with ADHD can veer toward hyperactive or inattentive or be a mix of the two. For people with ADHD, getting our bodies and our minds to cooperate and serve up just the right amount of attention, focus, and effort for the task at hand can be extremely challenging. Studies show that if ADHD is not diagnosed and well treated, the related challenges can significantly decrease life expectancy by up to 13 years. However, those same studies also show that life expectancy and outcomes are drastically improved by two main things: a proper diagnosis and a lifelong holistic treatment plan. ADHD impacts every area of our lives, so it makes sense that proper treatment should also touch multiple areas of our lives. So by a holistic treatment plan, we mean whole body, and that includes a combination of things like ADHD education, skills training, medical treatment, and even peer support. So I want to expand a little on the brain's executive functions, which are both delayed and impaired in individuals with ADHD. These functions are what help individuals manage and regulate our planning, decision-making, learning, judgment, emotions, and actions. If you're doing something, you're using your brain's executive functions. And as you can imagine, tonight we're talking about finances, so we really need them. There are several which you can see on the screen in this model based on the work of Dr. Thomas E. Brown. And they come online at different times and in different combinations depending on what we're trying to accomplish. Having them work at the right time in the right combination and in the right amounts for the task we're trying to accomplish is a process that's impaired in those of us with ADHD. So it leads us to have trouble in a lot of different areas, things like planning, organizing, time management, task initiation, problem solving, flexible thinking, working memory, emotional control, impulse control, attention control, effort control, and self-monitoring. So that's a lot of different areas of life. Executive function development continues until sometime between the ages of 20 and 29, at which time we pretty much top out behind our neurotypical peers, not quite reaching that same level that they've reached. Although our executive function is impaired and delayed, it's really important to know that it can still be strengthened and developed. You can think of these skills like a muscle. So along with medication or other treatments, things like receiving executive function coaching, occupational therapy, or creating systems for how you accomplish things can be really key ways to strengthen your executive function. And that is true even after our 20s. We could still strengthen our executive function even after that time where development has stopped. For those of you who are not able to view the screen or are on your phones, you can also find this graphic posted in our Meetup and our Discord groups. So I want to share tonight's agenda. Like I said, we're going to do things a little bit different. We're going to have our Q&A during our session. We're pretty much going to have an open Q&A, so feel free to type your questions in the chat. I'm so excited and pleased to welcome Rick Webster to speak to us tonight. Rick has spent many years serving the ADHD community. His work includes 25 years with CHAD and serving as a member on the national board. He's also an ADHD coach working exclusively with entrepreneurs, as well as being the founder of RenaFi, an academic research-based practical financial education platform. In addition to all those achievements, Rick is also one of the club in that he lives with ADHD himself. So tonight we welcome Rick to talk to us about how ADHD impacts our finances and what we can do about it. Welcome, Rick. I'm so glad that you're here. So before we dive into questions, I want to give you a chance to kind of introduce yourself and chat a little bit about this thing you call the ADHD tax.
Yeah, I didn't invent the phrase, but it's basically the idea is all the costs involved of not properly remediating ADHD. And even if we have, there's still going to be difficulties with it. And it's certainly not just money. There's hiding and imposter syndrome and damaged self-esteem and, all kinds of emotional issues, which is what we talk about at RenaFi at length, because money problems are typically not math problems. Obviously, we have to get the math correct, but the problems are usually emotionally based for us, and we get kind of blindsided, like a fish in water. We're used to our own water, and we don't know how else things could be. Kind of a tangent.
That makes total sense. What are some of the common things that you've seen when you work with people that kind of count as ADHD tax? Like, I'm sure you guys can also share in the chat, like, what are some of the areas that you struggle with? I'd love to hear from you. And Rick, what are some of the key areas that are usually like trouble spots for people?
Yeah, and actually, I'd love to see in the chat if people want to put it in there, but if you can just talk about it's pain points generally that bring people to these, and that's the ADHD tax. There are a lot of pain points to it. So what are they for you, right? Is it lost job, less income? Is it a lot of impulsive spending? Is it damaging emotional, relationships and that sort of thing? So there are usually quite a few different pain points. Which are the most frustrating to you? A lot of times we get angry, we get frustrated, we feel helpless, we feel like giving up. There's all these things happening. A lot of times we have some kind of internalized shame, especially if this has been going on for decades, which it probably has. And that can lead to a damaged self-esteem as well.
Oh, absolutely.
This sense of shame, it's frequently made into some kind of character issue, and it really isn't. It's not a character issue at all. ADHD is a neurological brain function difference, not a character issue. We have to take it out of that. And frankly, ADHD is horribly named. I don't believe it's a deficit or a disorder. I just don't think it's not that. it's not a disorder anymore. Then I can barely draw a stick figure. It doesn't mean I'm disordered. It just means I'm not great at that particular area of art. And we have to learn how to manage it. We have to learn how to get along in the world. There's no doubt about that. But I really don't see it as any kind of a disability. It can be if we don't remediate the negative side of it. That's for sure.
Yeah, a lot of people are saying that they have experienced all the things that you have mentioned. Brad wants to know, has there been any empirical research to quantify how big the ADHD tax is? Like, does it cost us 10% of our, potential income, or 20%, or?
I'm sure there has been. I'm not too familiar with that, but I can tell you one thing I'm familiar with is that we typically earn 25% or 75% of what our similarly talented counterparts earn. So we're starting off, we frequently bouncing on the bottom with entry-level jobs, having a hard time climbing the corporate ladder, or any other, anything that takes long-term consistency can be very difficult for us. And so we do earn less. And then, of course, we lose a lot of it in late fees and all kinds of things. Myself, I believe the more impactful and more insidious part of this is the emotional damage that comes along the way. And without that, we can recover and we can do a lot of things. I mean, we don't need to earn less money. About 20 to 25% of the CEOs in this country have ADHD. That wouldn't happen if ADHD was all a negative disorder. It would not happen. The reasoning behind that fact is, if you're the CEO of a company, you need to have a really broad, inch-deep, broad knowledge, and you need to be able to move quickly. You need to be able to make decisions fairly quickly, and you need to be able to identify patterns, and your intuition has to be. And those are all strengths of people with ADHD. They don't talk about that because researchers aren't paid by pharmaceutical companies to find that out, right? So the fact is, the information that we get is skewed.
And you also, most CEOs have the luxury of executive assistants, which I think can help a tremendous amount. I know in my parent group that I run, a lot of us have said, if we could only hire an executive assistant for our house, like, it would be so much easier to run life.
Well, and that goes both ways. The CEO has the luxury of delegating work, but the worker bee, if you want to call it that, also has the luxury of having someone who's created an entire structure to work within, right? And a tremendous number of people with ADHD are self-employed or in business for themselves, because we don't necessarily fit the mold very well. But if we get the right help and we understand how to delegate, and it doesn't have to be delegated to a person always, so there's a lot of applications that will make things work too. We do need to offshore, so to speak, the things that we're not very good at. And you listed off the 7, I think, primary executive function, and ADHD hits all of them.
Yeah, it sure
not
does.
always in the same measure with different people, but it hits them all.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting too that you talked about under earning, because one of the things that I've heard, for years since I started working with people that have ADHD is that if you go to an Under Earners Anonymous meeting, you'll find the majority of the people there have ADHD, and so it's a very common thing in that particular group, because it's a trait that's very common to us. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about now and not now thinking, and how that impacts our finances and the way that we deal with our finances.
It's one of the factors of executive function, this time blindness issue. And time blindness is rather complicated. It's not, I mean, you might get to your meetings all the time, on time, every single time. That doesn't mean you don't suffer from some kind of time blindness issue. It's not just a matter of being able to predict how long something will take. Time blindness also shows up in not adequately considering the impact of the future. And that's where it really impacts our finances, is that we don't, things that are right now are imperative. They're right in front of us. And that's what we're looking at, because the executive function needs to be able to say, yes, but that thing that's going to happen in the future is really going to come along, and you need to emotionally feel the impact of that, so that you know, in your mind, so that you can head it off. But for us, we don't feel that emotional impact. We say, yep, I need to pay my bill now. That's really important. My landlord is going to be upset with me. That's really important. Saving for retirement in 20 years, that's just not important. It's just off the radar. So neurotypical might be able to do better at splitting the attention and saying, yes, we do need to pay attention to the retirement issue. We do need to pay attention to purchasing a house. We do need to pay attention to keeping our job. We're more in the moment. And we have to remediate that. And there are some ways to do that.
Can you talk a little bit about those ways that, you know, are there systems or things that you recommend to people that they put in place? Because the thing I think about is all those things you talked about, buying a house, you know, saving for college, they are all multi-step things to do. And that's so challenging for us. Like, I can get the idea in my head that I want to save for my son's college, but then, you know, knowing the steps to take can be really challenging. And so can you talk a little bit about like the scaffolding that maybe is helpful?
Yeah, the first thing that top of my head is that we need to make it real. We need to get in touch. The way I look at it, we need to get in touch with our future self and say, what's our future self going to think of this decision, or to do something or not do it? What's it going to, and the example I've probably given too many times now, but if you're in the car dealership and there's a luxury car there and you think it's really fancy and you want to buy it, but you only have, say, $10,000 and it's a $120,000 car, salesperson says, fine, you know, we can make it work for you. We can give you a long-term loan and etc. If you get in touch with your future self before you buy that, your future self 3 years from now is going to say, gosh, we're still going to owe 100,000. It's only going to be worth 70. We'd have to write a check for $30,000 to get rid of this thing. It's an old status symbol now, which loses its status because the only status it has is brand new. So our future self would be saying, don't buy the car. So we need to make it real. We need to get in touch with the consequences, and pausing is another really good way to do it. If you're in the car dealership and you didn't go there to buy the car, you went there to look, right? You went there to kind of look at several things and decide what you were going to do. Stick with it. Right? We don't have to be impulsive. We can make up, I call it a preloaded decision matrix. We say, okay, you know, my wife and I, we're going down to the car dealership. We are not buying a car today. Our job is to do research. That's what we're doing. And no matter how good the salesperson is and how deep the discount they're promising to offer us, we're not buying a car today, and stick with it. And so it gives your rational mind time to catch up to the emotional mind. The emotional mind thinks in pictures in a way. This is metaphorical, but it thinks in pictures, which is instant. That's why we can get triggered when someone says something we think is insulting. We get triggered and we're really upset before we even rationally say, well, did they really mean that? Oh, they didn't mean that. But we're off to the races. We're triggered and we're upset. So the emotional mind has a lot more weight to it than the rational mind. And the rational mind is a lot slower. It thinks in words. Think of the speed of light versus the speed of sound. Think of the size of the sun versus the size of the moon. I mean, it's just the emotional mind is very powerful and very quick, and the rational mind needs to have time to catch up. And Absolutely. It will catch up, but you got to install a pause there for all kinds of things, not just for buying a car, but
for everything. I find that to be one of the most useful tools that I've learned with my ADHD, because I'm quite impulsive. So I think that, you know, it's a helpful tool across the board for sure. Terrific. Thank you so much. Let's see. Michael's asking, has the company ever withhold when you get your refund? Oh, I think he's suggesting to have your company over withhold on your taxes, and then plan to use your refund for something, which is is a smart idea.
Yeah, you're offshoring again. You're taking yourself out of that decision loop. You're making a decision and have some kind of enforcement to it. Myself, I like the idea of paying yourself first. I would simply say, because the IRS is not going to give you any interest or anything like that, and it may not matter, it may not be very much. but I would rather have my company send more money to my retirement account or any other account. It can be the account that I'm keeping my vacation money in. That does require a little more self-discipline because you could get to it, and you're not going to be able to get to that tax money until tax time. Once it's withheld, it's withheld. Although you could certainly change the rule. But yeah, it's a good idea. And I don't think the interest on a relatively small amount of money is going to matter. So yeah, having them withhold a few extra $100 or whatever it is. I've never heard that, but it certainly would work.
That's great. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, I know the last time you and I talked, we talked about how the ADHD tax isn't always money related. And so like I alluded to in the beginning of like our intro about ADHD, you know, there's a life expectancy issue that goes along with ADHD. And so can you talk a little bit about how finances kind of play into all that?
They're the majority of it. So the Russell Barkley talks, I believe, between 15 and 18 years. And a person with chronic financial stress has a shortened life expectancy of 12 years. It's amazing. It's all the things that come from it, right? It's not just the stress you're going through. It's the fact that you don't have health insurance. It's the fact that you're eating cheaper food. It's the fact that you don't care about yourself enough to get down to the doctor and get an appointment, even if you have medical insurance, right? All these kind of depressive and anxious things that are laying into you chronically over a long period of time. And yeah, it is wow. I agree with you, Elise. It's 12 years. You know, we tend to think, and it's just the way our society works, but they say the average life expectancy in the United States is, I think, 78, something like that. But if you look at individual populations, it's all over the board, right? You can look at wealth disparities, racial issues, educational issues. It's all over the board. And ADHD in itself, with the financial stress that it causes, drops a whole lot of years. And you know, that's because of health. It's also suicides, it's accidents, it's just all kinds of things add into that. But it's really serious enough to deal with, to address it, which is one of the things I'm sure you see. But I've been doing CHAD groups for 25 years now, and I've been doing ADDA groups for, you know, for 4, 5, 6 years. It's just shocking to me how many people realize ADHD is really serious. They realize it's really impacting their life, but they don't take the steps that are proven to work. And you know, that's an executive function probably. I mean, it's like bootstraps, right? You're swimming in the own, you know, your own environment and don't realize it. But it really is worth addressing. A full diagnosis, so you know what you're dealing with, and so you have that belief. You say, okay, well, this really is what it is. I don't just need to have a better diet here. I actually have some other things going on. And then mainstream medications, there's lots of alternatives, but mainstream medications have been proven to work in 80% of the people. You know, if I have a broken arm, I'm going to the doctor who says, here's the best chance of fixing that arm, right? I'm not just going to say, oh, this guy says all I have to do is eat better and my arm will get better. I'm not going to do that, especially with ADHD. It's like decades go by.
Right.
And it's my soapbox, but if you've got ADHD, you know, it's treatable. It's one of the most treatable mental issues, and it's actually a physical neurobiological issue, but it's one of the most treatable things out there.
Now, are there some systems or some suggestions that you recommend to people when they first come into a group meeting and they're struggling, like how maybe they can set up things online or use different apps? Could you share some of those things with us?
I would actually say that the emotional things are far more powerful. Okay, so that's number one. Clearly, there are apps and all kinds of things that can be helpful. But my suggestion is, number one, get a full diagnosis, including a physical, to rule out sleep apnea and all those other things that can go with it, and often do. And then, you know, take the medication. You know, medication helps. It will not solve the problem. If you don't work on it, the medication will work for 2 or 3 months, and then your brain will bring you back to the status that you were at before, right? So you were in a state of equilibrium. The medication pushed you out of that, gave you a window to work on it. But if you don't work on it, the medication will cease to work, right? I've seen that so many times. So So you take the medication and then you start doing work, and you know, cognitive behavioral therapy is a really good thing to do. Inflow is a really great place to go for some of that. I really like them. People often ask me, well, are they free? If it works, it's worth it, right?
Yeah,
I mean, I
exactly.
don't even know what they are. They're like 30 or 40 bucks, I think. But if it works, it's worth it. It changes your life. You know, the things that do work. So, you know, and I really don't know exactly what they cost, but I know from people that have talked to me that they do good. And then the very first thing I thought of when you started talking after those things, we're social creatures. So join groups like this one. Join groups where you are in your tribe. When we feel better, we do better, right? It's not just the fact that our executive function has some difficulties. It's the fact that we're depressed and we're anxious and we have a really damaged self-esteem, and we just, Carol Dweck talks about fixed versus growth mindset.
Mhm.
We get into this fixed mindset. I'm broken. I have a lifelong disorder. Russell Barkley says, I'll never get better, right? And I like Russell Barkley. He does spot on research, but he misses the part where we need to feel better to do better. He misses the emotional component to it. I entirely. But you know, but I totally agree. I'm not dissing Russell Barkley.
I
Everything
didn't think you were.
everything that he says is spot on. I've never heard him say anything. He doesn't shoot from the hip. He does research.
But I like what you said about, you know, not worrying about how much things cost if they work, because one of the things that sounds counterintuitive that I've done for the last couple of years, thanks COVID, is Instacart. And I used to spend so much extra money, like getting sidetracked in the store, like, oh, I need this. Oh, that's new. This looks great. And it's actually saved me so much money, even though I'm paying for the service, because I don't wander the aisles. I'm just useless in a grocery store. So, yeah, I mean, I think those things that cost us money, if we can outsource them, and we can work it into our budget, can be important.
And they cost other things such as our self-esteem, right? So if we are bumping our head up against something that feels like a brick wall, at some point we will develop a fixed mindset that that's a brick wall. I can never surpass it. I actually heard a couple of those things in the introduction, I think, where I forgot where you were mentioning the executive function. The brain matures at a certain point, and certain things come online, and at age 20 or 27, I don't know what your numbers were, that's kind of it. That's actually a fixed mindset. I believe that we can grow for our entire lives. And you know, clearly
We absolutely can. I agree with you 100%. The distinction there is that developmentally, like actual physical development ceases at that age. But that's one of the things that we you know, talk about too, is those executive functions are like a muscle. So you have to work them. And that's, we had, our last speaker talked about leaning into things that make us uncomfortable. And that was not a super popular topic among a lot of people, because nobody likes the idea of leaning into things that are difficult. But like when it comes to finances and stuff, sometimes you can't get around that.
actually, I don't believe ADHD is a superpower, but it is one of the things that's good about ADHD is that we're not afraid to lean in. It's an interesting thing that people just don't, it's common sense once you realize it, but they don't buy it, I guess. Getting out of your comfort zone is the way you expand your comfort zone, right? Your comfort zone will just shrink and shrink and shrink until you're living in a goldfish bowl at home if you are afraid to do anything. But when you go out and do stuff, I believe actually the greatest failing in life in a way is the failure to try, right? No matter how long the odds, if you want it, the failure to try only teaches you one thing, that you're kind of a coward, right? You're afraid to fail. But if you don't try, you fail for sure. If you do try and you fail, you learn something, you learn you're stronger, you can handle it, you learn the lesson, and next time you up against that situation, you'll do better. So if you want your comfort zone to expand, you have to push the boundaries a little bit.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, failing to try is not a good thing. That trying and failing, there's nothing wrong with that. That's how we learn. I don't know about you. When I learned how to ride a bicycle, I fell off quite a few times.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
If I was afraid to fall off, I would have never learned. In fact, I wouldn't have learned English if I was afraid to try. It's just, that's how we learn. We learn by doing.
For people that, I think a couple people were talking about, once they get diagnosed and they know they have ADHD and they're medicated and they're trying to do everything right, we still have times where we spend emotionally. Are there any tips besides maybe like pausing and stuff like that? Like any systems or things that we might be able to suggest for people?
My primary suggestion is do the things that make you feel better. And eating a quart of chocolate ice cream is probably not going to make you feel better in the long run, right? It may feel better in that moment, just like retail therapy. You go out and buy something that you didn't know you even wanted, and it feels good somehow. You're making some progress. If you can find healthier ways, emotionally healthier ways to feel better, then that's really where you want to be at. And that would be joining groups like this one, finding other people and getting out in the world and such. We engage in retail therapy, so to speak, and food therapy because we're depressed, right? We don't feel good. There's something wrong in our lives, and we think that the chocolate cake in the refrigerator is going to fix it for us, and it isn't, right?
Right.
So my suggestion would be to figure out, the way I look at these things, it's a cascade. You think of a cascade of dominoes, okay? How can I put this in another venue? Okay, so the guy that robs the liquor store, he didn't rob the liquor store because it was there. He didn't just walk down the street one day and say, oh my gosh, I'm going to rob that liquor store. There was a whole cascade of events that probably started when he was 3 years old that led to that point, right? It's exactly the same thing when we find ourselves buying that kayak that we didn't know we wanted in the morning, but we're buying it now, putting it on our credit card, and we're making the minimum payment, and we're taking this thing home. So it didn't start the day you walked into the store and saw the kayak. It started a few days ago when you had an argument with your spouse, or you got fired, or something happened, and that didn't start with that. Something was before that. Just like with a medical condition, the earlier you interrupt the problem in the cascade, the easier and simpler it is to do it. If you start saving money when you're 18, you don't have to save as much money as if you wait until you're 50 for your retirement. If you feel a pain in your side, it's probably easier to treat it now than if you wait 10 years, if it's a serious issue. So I would say the problem didn't start when you bought something impulsively. Look back up the stream and say, what's causing me to be susceptible to this kind of self-medication? And that's what it is. It's self-medication.
It's interesting too, because we talk in our groups a lot about how when you have ADHD, those of us with ADHD seem to have really great imaginations. And so a lot of times we imagine ourselves as people who knit, or we imagine ourselves as someone who goes fishing, and so we have a tendency to buy all this stuff. I was talking to one of our board members, and he was like, oh, your son's playing drums? I've got drums at home from when I used to play. I've got fencing gear from when I used to fence. And so, I think for a lot of us, we imagine ourselves, doing those things, and we spend money on those things. So, to your point, like kind of getting before that and seeing, what's the root of these purchases and stuff like that. We have to kind of be mindful of them.
No, absolutely. And another emotional issues, a lot, especially kids, but continues into adulthood. We kind of live in our heads because the outside world is too painful. It's not working out the way we want, and dreaming and fantasizing about things is easier, and it makes us feel better, and it's an escape. But if we live in that world, then the rest of our world starts to cave in around us, and we don't make as much progress. So
yeah,
that is an issue too. They talk about ADHD being a deficit disorder, which I totally do not believe. I believe our imaginations are a really powerful thing for most people with ADHD, at least the people I've met, right? I would agree with Russell Barkley that there's nothing intrinsically good about ADHD in itself, right? It is a deficit of these things, there's no doubt. But if you live your life solving crises because you've created so many of them, you get really good at solving crises. And next thing you know, you're a really good EMT worker, or a police officer, or a fireman, right? Or a high-tech worker in Silicon Valley. So we get really good at certain things. Not everybody, it's a bell curve, but we can get very good at reading the subtext of a person's face because we've had so many difficulties growing up and, rejections and, when you're a kid, you don't want to be marginalized because that's extinction, right? You want to be part of the tribe. You don't want to be bullied and be on the outside. So we get really good at reading subtext of what people are doing and thinking. That's a really good trait. If you become a therapist someday, that's a really good trait to have. So there's a lot of good things and bad things that grow out of growing up with ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it causes, traumas and depression and anxiety and those kind of, other issues, binge eating, things like that can come. But there's a lot of good things that come from it too.
What are your thoughts? I'm curious. I mean, because our jobs go along with our finances. And so it can, we've had some discussions about disclosing or not disclosing. And that's one thing I'm curious to hear your views on. And then also maybe I'll say my next question. So that's the first thing I was curious about.
Okay. So repeat that. Sorry,
I was curious about, we talk in our support groups about disclosing or not disclosing your ADHD in your job. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And speaking actually as a small employer myself, and I've been, so if I were working in a company, in a corporation, and I had a difficulty, I was worried, I don't think that I would go to them and say, hey, I've got ADHD, you have to do such and such for me. I don't think I would take that route. First of all, everybody in this room has a different internal definition of ADHD. We all have a different experience. None of us has the same definition, and yet we're all familiar with ADHD. What do you think your boss is going to be? All he's going to think of is, oh, is this Dennis the Menace? Is this the, Spacey Casey? I mean, what is this? They're going to start thinking about liability and all those kind of things. If you say that, I would simply tell them what they need to know, right? Unless you're looking for true accommodations. But if I were highly distractible, I'd say, you know what, I could do a better job for you. If you get me away from the receptionist desk, get me away from the water cooler, give me that desk back there that's nice and quiet, get me away from the distractions. Maybe allow me to come in, 2 hours late. I will work at home, right? You'll see the productivity. If you can make those kind of accommodations, I'll do a better job for you. Most bosses will be acceptable to that or amenable to that. They'll listen to that. But if you say, hey, I've got ADHD, you have to do something, that's not a very good place to start.
Yeah.
Right? You're basically putting your problem on them instead of saying, this is what you could do for me that would cause me to be a better employee here.
Yeah, I like that. I think institutionally, like I'm dealing with it with school with my son. And, those of us that talk about ADHD a lot, we have a false sense that the rest of the world understands what ADHD is and what ADHD isn't. And so it can be, just disclosing, like you said, sometimes people in positions of power or order over you, they have no context for what ADHD is. So yeah, that's good suggestion.
And they really don't know that we all have a different definition of ADHD.
Right. Because it's like they say, if you've met one person with ADHD, you've met one person with ADHD, like we're all so different. It's really a spectrum in and of itself as well. Yeah. So another question is, one thing that's really challenging for people, I think just in general, is talking about salaries. Do you think that there's any, do you find in your groups that it's, since you were mentioning that we are underpaid quite often, do you think part of it is that we don't know how to negotiate well for our salaries and whatnot?
It may be a lack of knowing how to negotiate, although there's lots of, education on that out there. I think it's more internal than that. I think it's a damaged self-esteem. It's I'm not worth it. If they don't want to give me the raise, they'll probably fire me for asking, which they won't do, but they might fire me for asking, and then nobody else is going to want me. It's kind of funny, but I actually I had someone come to me, and she's worth $250,000 a year, and she's being paid 90. She's working for a nonprofit, and she loved working for it, you know, a legal entity. And she was the CEO of it. She was in charge, but they weren't paying her very well. And I basically said, well, how much do you really love that job? And then it kind of came out, she was a little bit afraid to leave that job because it was making the payment, even though she was having a hard time making it. So anyway, it took a while, but she got brave enough, and she quit that job. And now she's got another job as the chief diversity officer at a bigger organization. And she's making 153. She's still not getting the 250 she's worth, but she went from 90 to 153. And it was tough because this is a Stanford graduate attorney who with a resume that's just stellar, right? I mean, it was an amazing resume. And she's afraid to take the chance of going out, and afraid she might not get another job, right? It's a damaged self-esteem issue.
Yeah. Yeah. And that happens to a lot of us. I really have high hopes for people, you know, those of us that were diagnosed late in life, I think have different self-esteem issues than people that were diagnosed when they were younger. And it's, you know, ever since I got into this work, that's been my biggest hope, is that the kids that are coming up now will have less self-esteem issues and be able to own their ADHD in a different way than those of us that were diagnosed late have been able to do, if that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense. And I think if you eliminate a lot of the damage that happens along the way, that's what's happening, emotional damage. The positive sides of ADHD, which are secondary factors, but those things will be expressed a lot more. There's a reason why 20 to 25% of the CEOs in the country are people with ADHD. There's a reason for that, right? They think outside the box. They're impulsive. They'll take chances. They're not afraid to make certain mistakes and stuff. There's the other end of the spectrum of people who are afraid to do stuff, you know, that have, maybe they're living in an imposter syndrome kind of situation. Now they're afraid that if they try something, they'll be found out and they'll never recover to the job they were in before. So it's both sides of that. But I do believe that if you could eliminate a lot of the damage that happens way upstream, you know, when they're 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, it is tough growing up with ADHD. Everybody in this room knows that. You know, with boys, they're found out really early. They're in trouble all the time. They're sent to the principal's office. They're suspended. They end up in prison. I mean, there's a whole pipeline there that's going on. With girls, and it's a bell curve. I'm not saying everybody's the same, but girls are typically inattentive, so they're not caught as far as ADHD goes. And they go home and they spend twice as much time doing their homework. So they come in and they get A's, and everybody says, "Oh, you're doing great." And then when they're later on in life, they have a hard time getting diagnosed. Well, you did great. You're top 10% of your class in high school, and now you're at a great university. What are you complaining about? Well, they come up with anxiety and depressive issues a lot. You know, boys get oppositional and they break windows and rob banks. I don't know what they do, but they get in trouble, right? Girls, on the other hand, end up internalizing and have a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression issues, and those are, you know, pretty tough to deal with. And so it's a reason why a lot of girls are diagnosed in college and undergrad work. They've left home, they don't have that structure, and you know, it's really tough.
It is. It's very different. It presents so differently. Like, you know, when I was younger, no one would have suspected, based on what they knew of ADHD at the time, that I had ADHD. So yeah, it flies under the radar.
There are still practitioners out there that think if you get straight A's, you can't have ADHD.
Oh yes, we had someone in our group this week, and actually, not just at school, it was a doctor who told them that, and it's maddening.
It's damaging too. I don't know what it takes to get the message across. That's what I was saying. Everybody has a different idea of what ADHD is, but if you listen to Russell Barkley, who's a great person to be listening to, he'll tell you that the knowledge centers of the brain are not part of the ADHD problem. We have the knowledge, whatever intelligence level we are. ADHD is not on the intelligence spectrum. We know what we know. We just have a hard time using our executive functions to accomplish what we're trying to do with that knowledge. That's really the whole game right there, is we know we don't do. There's intention and there's action, and we have all kinds of intentions. We don't take the actions, then we feel guilty and ashamed, and all this damaged self-esteem comes in because we know we can do it, but we don't. So there's only explanation we have is what people told us in 3rd grade, is that we must be lazy and irresponsible, which is not true. And when we think we're lazy and irresponsible, we start figuring out, okay, what do we do about laziness? That's not the problem. So we forget to deal with the emotional issues that are driving a lot of this, because we're looking in the wrong direction because everybody else told us we were lazy. Anyway, it's annoying to say the least, because I see the damage just continues on because of the lack of understanding.
Absolutely. It is annoying. Let's see. Sarah has a question. Please, if possible, provide some tips for financial management for the most ADHD friendly jobs, which often don't have inherent stability, such as acting or contract work, but require hard work without opportunity for second or side jobs.
It's a tough question. I don't think there is any ideal ADHD job because we're all different. I would have said years ago, I would have said that accounting is a horrible job but I then met a really creative, and I don't mean fraudulent creative, I mean creative, good accountant. Amazing work, right? And I don't think she would have been able to do that work without the ADHD component. I just don't think so.
Michael says that's him because he's an accountant.
So there isn't a particular, but there are tendencies, right? We like to move. If we were hyperactive, we need to be moving. So a lot of times physical jobs are good. Middle of the last century or something, I graduated from college, and my whole family says, what are you gonna do next? Which grad school are you picking? Because that was just what they expected. Wouldn't have been the right thing for me. But I did what I was expected to do temporarily, at least. I quit, but I signed up and I went to law school, and I drove a taxi on the weekends to earn money. I was perfectly good as a taxi driver. People get in my car, I have a great conversation with them, and it was a lot of fun. I learned something about them, and then they'd be gone. That's perfect for me. Sitting in a windowless room with a stack full of books, somebody who says, come back on Monday, we're going to give you a test. That's awful. That was like torture, that Middle Ages stuff for me. So I fortunately grew up a little bit and said, I just shouldn't be in here. This is not my place. I don't care what the family says. This is not where I need to be. But it's the same ADHD brain in both cases, right? It manifests differently. So we do need to find a place where we can fit well with our version of ADHD. And a lot of times physical activity is really important. Independence is huge important, which is why, we do take the gig job. It is why maybe we're we're a therapist and working for an agency. We want independence, so we create our own agency. We say, okay, well, I'm a therapist, I'm fully trained, I'll just be my own and go out on my own. A lot of self-employed people with ADHD.
And you primarily, or exclusively, I should say, coach entrepreneurs. So that's a group of people that you're really, familiar with. And I wonder, I think it's easy to see why so many of us gravitate towards being self-employed. It's much easier than dealing with a boss, and we're so creative and we want to do things our own way. But are there any particular traits or insights that you've gotten from that aspect of your work that you might be able to share for people that are looking for jobs or to make a switch in their career?
Slow moves, that would be my first thought. Slow moves stick. Right? If you try to make revolutionary changes, you're probably going to crash and burn in some way. Coaching entrepreneurs, and that's RenaFi is an offshoot of that, right? And the coaching thing was really just kind of an experiment that I tried, and I liked it. It's a lot of fun. We changed it from individual for the most part to group coaching because it's a lot cheaper and actually better. It's better to be in a group because you get a bunch of people helping you. But I think independence is a really strong streak in us, and we don't like being told what to do. And a lot of times we really are good at what we do. I mean, we have to become better self-observers. I mean, to know if we really are better or if we just think we're better. There's that issue sometimes. But the problem comes in is we're really good at making widgets. we're only being paid half of what we think we're worth because we see what the widgets are being sold for. And we say, well, my gosh, my boss isn't doing anything. He comes in at 10 o'clock, sits in the office and doesn't do anything. So I'm going to go out myself and make widgets myself. Might be able to do that, but we've left behind the structure of someone who managed. Remember in the very beginning of this talk, we talked about, you know, the CEO having the privilege of having a whole bunch of people to delegate to. Well, the people they're delegating to are also having the privilege of working within a system that has been honed to work, right? So when you leave that system, you need to create new systems of your own. You know, James Clear, Atomic Habits, talks about we rise or fall to the level of our systems. It's really true. You could be the best widget maker in the world. If you go into business making widgets and don't know how to do business, it's not going to happen, right? It's not going to happen. So I would say it's a really good place to be. It's a chance to be paid what you're worth. It's also a chance to get paid nothing, right? Because you're not, you know, it's no minimum wage when you're self-employed.
Right.
So, but if you are really good at it and a lot of times people are afraid to delegate, right? They just can't let go. That's another little rabbit hole, but that people, they're self-employed and then there's business. They're two different things. They're opposite ends of the spectrum. Nothing wrong with either one, but the self-employed person can't let go. They got to do everything because they can do it better than anybody else, right? Which, by the way, is not true. There's nothing you can do that someone else on the planet can't do better. There's nothing. There's 8 billion people on the planet. You're not the best at anything, right? We just have to accept that. So you're the best at being you. I would say that. So if you're self-employed, you really want to hang on to everything, and it's fine. You'll have a job, but it'll never grow because you can't leverage out. You can't get extra people rowing the boat, so to speak. It's just you doing it. The business person, on the other hand, the mindset is you do something until you can afford to hire someone who's better at it than you, and then you offshore that, right? You do your own books until you can afford somebody better at the books. You do your own marketing until you can afford someone better at marketing. You do your own everything until you can afford to hire someone better. You're even going to replace yourself at some point. There is, you know.
That really strikes me as a growth mindset, because so many people, like myself included, when I first became self-employed, my mind wasn't thinking of those things. And I just continued for years to do everything myself because of my challenges with planning and organization and seeing like what that future could look like. So I think that's a huge benefit, just to hear like that from someone early on. When you're becoming self-employed is really important. And I think that ties in. Elise was asking, how do you deal with the occasional overwhelm, stress, exhaustion of working for yourself? And I think, yeah, if you can delegate, that's one really good way to do it. Do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, we're social creatures. I say that until I'm blue in the face, but by evolution, we are social creatures. We don't do well all by ourselves. That's why in prison, solitary confinement is such a tough thing. You know, we're out here and we think, oh my gosh, I'd love to have some, you know, solitude, right? But it's different when it's enforced and it's, you know, and you're stuck and it's not your choice.
Right.
So I would absolutely say, whether you're in business or self-employed, you don't want to isolate. Go join other groups, join a business group, join a coaching group, join the Chamber of Commerce, right? Depending on where you're at, join a referral group. I'm not a fan of referral groups, but the trouble with referral groups is everybody's there to sell something, right? So it's a bit of an issue, and it could be good depending on what you're in, but the idea is go find other people that are kind of in your tribe. And especially in business, you need to associate with successful people, and the only place you're going to find them is in other business groups, right? As Jim Rohn said, we channel we're the sum total of the 5 people we spend the most time with. We channel people, right? Another story I've told a few times, but one of our RenaFi members, and she's incredibly successful, spoken on her thing in 5 continents. She's a college professor, and she's written a couple books, and I guess, or I don't know exactly what she's done. She's done a lot of stuff. And I was sitting trying to write my blog, right? Just this little blog with, 3,000 words or something like that. And I'm struggling with it, and I'm just thinking, and I won't use names, but I was thinking, what would she be doing? And I realized she wouldn't be sitting here struggling to write it. She'd just, start typing, forget the blank page, just start typing, and there's plenty of time to correct it later. And I channeled that, and I got going, right? I channeled her because she's a very successful person within my sphere of influence. If I didn't, a long time ago, my very first coach, I remember many times I'd be in a situation, I'd say, what would Nancy do? What would she be doing in this situation? And I could access her mental apparatus, in a way, and think, oh, if I get into her shoes and think the way that she thinks, and then I'm thinking, well, I bet she wouldn't be doing what I was thinking of doing. I think I'm going to do it a different way. So we channel the people with us. So in business, we want to be with successful people. We learn from them, and we channel their behavior, including their behavior of getting their work done. And then if it's social, we want to channel people that are responsible, that are friendly, that understand us, that don't just, I don't want somebody who just says, hey, Rick, I noticed you were late the last 15 times. Don't worry about it. I don't want that person in my life, quite frankly. I want the person in my life that says, hey, Rick, I noticed you've been late a few times. What can we do? Can we help you? Do you need a reminder? What is it? And if someone said that to me, do you need a reminder? That would spark my, adult side. I'm not a kid. I'll be there and I would be there after that. Right. So that person, without lifting a finger, really would be helping me. I think we have to be really careful who we have around us.
That's really true. I love that. We had a board meeting this weekend, and we were just talking about that, how sometimes we will use the other person, like I'll use Yulia's experience, and she's one of our board members, and her way of tackling things sometimes when I'm having trouble motivating, getting myself started. And I think with finances, that's, like when it's time to balance our checkbook, or it's time to do these things, they're really hard to motivate ourselves to do. So that's a good trick. You can pretend you're someone else.
And there are quick ways to do it, because it takes a while to build a social circle and a business circle, but you can do body doubling with people, right? And it's an interesting thing, but if you're trying to clean your kitchen and struggling with that, if you just have a friend sitting at the kitchen table that doesn't lift a finger, they can be reading a book or something, you'll get your kitchen done.
Oh yeah.
We are social creatures. Literally, we need other people to get things done.
Absolutely.
So body doubling is a good thing, and accountability groups and coaching groups. I'm tempted to say I'm a little bit biased, but the fact is I know they work. Right?
Oh,
when
absolutely.
You're in a group of other people determined to be successful and determined to help the other people in their group be successful. Everybody is moving in the same direction.
That's so true. I'd love for Adam or Michael to put the link into our co-working and body doubling group. Adam started that for our community last year, and Michael has taken it over this year, and it's great. I mean, people get so much stuff done. It's just, it's amazing just having someone else there and being able to check in and say, hey, I'm going to do my bills right now. I don't want to, but I'm going to. And because I said I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. So yeah, that's terrific. There was a really great question that I wanted to ask. Sarah asked, if possible, could you address the emotional aspect of the guilt of delegating?
My dad grew up in the Great Depression, and it was traumatized him, right? As you might imagine, he was a boy back then. His generation was, if you want it done right, you do it yourself, right? But the world's changed. At this point, if you want it done right, you find someone who knows how to do it and you hire them, right? Because if I have a legal problem, I'm not going to try to be my own lawyer. I'm going to delegate it to a lawyer who specializes in that area. That's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to go back to law school to solve my legal problem. I'm going to learn enough to be an informed consumer, so I get a good lawyer that knows the right things. But the world's complicated. I don't, when I was in college, I fixed my own car. I wouldn't even think about doing that these days. Right there, you can't even get your fingers inside the engine. We need to delegate if we want things done right. My question would be, is it more important that you do it, or is it more important that it get done? And if it's not getting done and you're not doing it, then there should be no guilt in saying, you know what, this is just kicking me every time. I need to delegate this. When I was another lifetime, but it's like 40 something years ago, I started in real estate, and the guy up on the stage, sales trainer, said, if you're mowing your own lawn, you're losing money. Never forgot that, because most people have someone mow their lawn so they can save the 25 bucks or whatever it is. But if you're trained to do something for $100 an hour, and you're doing something that pays out at 25, and if you're trained to do something that helps somebody else, you're doing a disservice to yourself, to the gardener, and to the client that you're not bothering to help because you're so busy mowing your own lawn trying to save 25 bucks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, imagine a brain surgeon mowing her own lawn, right? The fact that she could be saving someone's life at that moment, but she's trying to save a little bit of money, and because she didn't want to, maybe felt guilty about delegating the lawn job. I'm obviously exaggerating, but there's nothing to feel guilty about in delegating. You're not shirking any duties. What you're doing is making sure the job that's important gets done.
Yeah, that's, you know, as you're talking, I'm just thinking like that makes so much sense. And the beauty of like actually having these conversations is that those are things that we don't often think about. And I think those, maybe even people beyond those of us that have ADHD, have a really difficult time visualizing the cost benefit of you know, delegating or outsourcing things. And when you talk about it in a group like this, you know, we don't talk about finances enough, even as a country, like personal finances.
It's crazy. Yeah, I agree. And I was just reading what Sarah, I don't read the chat very well because I don't multitask, but yeah, this idea that we somehow have to feel guilty because we can't get something done, right? I don't feel guilty because I can't paint a beautiful picture. If I want a piece of art on my wall, I'm going to go buy it from someone who knows how to paint a piece of beautiful art, you know, that I can afford, something that's in my area. So there's a zillion things I can't do. I don't feel guilty about having somebody else fix my car.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I don't feel guilty about that. I would feel guilty if I bought the art and paid for the car and all that kind of stuff and spent my time watching Netflix, right? If I'm doing something productive, I'm assuming I'm doing what I'm good at, and what I'm good at has some value to other people. Otherwise, they wouldn't be interested in paying me for it. So if I can do more of that, and now the landscaper's happy and the mechanic is happy, everybody's kind of happy in this circular system that we have. You know, I'm not saying we're in the best, you know, economic system. Don't get me wrong. It's a horrible system that we're in, but we're in it. And what I'm saying is that we should do what we do best. And if there's something that we're just not going to get good at ever, delegate it. It's important that it get done.
Yeah, makes sense.
I'll give you another example that it might resonate with some of the people in here. The same person I was telling you about, the attorney, she came into one of my RenaFi groups and she said something about she had to let her housekeeper go. And I'm just like, oh, read the room, lady. You know, 98% of the people never had a housekeeper ever. And you're complaining about having to let your housekeeper go. That was before I knew her. But now that I understand her system, she's exactly right to have a housekeeper, because she was going to work at this, you know, legal organization, running it basically, doing a lot of good in the world. It was a nonprofit in the, you know, in the racial diversity, equity, inclusion field, right? That's her specialty. She's not going to do anybody any good by cleaning her sink, right? Now, I still think she should have read the room, because that's, you know, that most of the people never had a housekeeper. But when you really got into her life, you say, well, it would be stupid for her to be, it would be a waste of her talent to be cleaning the house. Somebody who wanted the job wouldn't have it, and she would be failing to do the job that she, you know, paid $250,000 to get educated to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So I think we got to get over this idea that you don't have to do, you can't do everything yourself. If we wouldn't have 8 billion people on the planet if everybody insisted on doing it themselves. We wouldn't have the infrastructure. We wouldn't have any of the stuff that we have. You know, you wouldn't have a cell phone. We wouldn't have any of this stuff if everybody insisted on doing it themselves.
Absolutely. So let's see. Cyrus asks, Rick, you mentioned ADHD is very treatable. As someone who's diagnosed recently, the treatment path is unclear to me. So aside from getting the right medication, what does an effective ADHD treatment plan look like? And what aspects of that treatment have a meaningful impact on managing ADHD symptoms that reduce our quality of life?
That's a really well thought out question. That person is going to do well.
Cyrus
So,
always has good questions.
it was great. So number one, an accurate and full diagnosis includes a physical, includes a bunch of things. It's not just reading a book and saying, hey, I got all the questions right in the back of it. You're not taking a test. I believe that you go out and you don't necessarily coach your psychiatrist. You don't go in there and say, hey, I read this book and I got all these symptoms, and the psychiatrist, oh yeah, sounds good to me. Here's some pills, and go away because I've got things to do. You don't want to do their homework for them. They've got a medical degree. They've seen a couple thousand people. Let them do the work. Go in there and tell them your symptoms that you have. Don't coach them on the diagnosis. They'll figure it out themselves. If you disagree with their symptoms, with their diagnosis, then you give a little bit of pushback, but you don't stop listening to them because they know more than you do. You're in the Dunning-Kruger thing, right? You know very little, they know a lot. So you want to make sure that you don't advocate your responsibility to yourself, but you also don't want to be so stubborn when that happens with ADHD that you won't listen to what they're saying, right? If they tell you it's not ADHD, it's sleep apnea, you probably should be listening, right? Because if you treat sleep apnea with a strong stimulant, it may not work out. So anyway, so I think number one is that, and that's a bigger project than most people realize. It's hard to get properly diagnosed. It takes some time, and it takes effort, especially a lot of people are challenged with not having health insurance and such. Next would be taking the proper medications, and medications were like guinea pigs, right? The science isn't there yet. So you're going to try it. You're going to come back and tell them, this worked, that didn't work. And they're going to titrate your medication up or down, and they're going to change it until they find something that works. And we really are kind of guinea pigs in that. So they're not just going to give you the right medication instantly, most likely. And then behavior modification therapy is really called for. If you can try doing that yourself, depends how severe things are, but that's a really good thing. And then I believe ADHD friendly living environment, which includes your work, includes all the things around you. If you're constantly having friction with everything, you can't feel good about anything that way. So my whole social matrix practically changed when I was diagnosed. It's gonna happen. People fall in love with the facade that you've been putting out there because you were too ashamed and embarrassed to admit who you were. So you were kind of an imposter pretending to be something else. Now you're trying to be yourself. Well, that's not the person they liked, right? So some of them will shift, other ones won't. So I think we have it. And also some of those people would be damaging to you, the existing people. Like if you come out of alcohol rehab after your 30 days, you may have to change friends because you can't go back to the same bars and parties and stuff you were doing before, right? You have an issue. So you may have to change friends and change environments and all that. But yeah, I would say that the number one thing is to find ways to get the things done that you want to get done so you can feel better about yourself. And frequently that means, I don't believe we take things off our plate because we're less capable, but I believe we take things off our plate until we can start achieving 100% of what we set out to do. And then we slowly layer back on, stopping before we hit the failure point. If you're telling yourself you'll do 10 things every day and you only do 7, that's damaging your self-esteem every single day.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense.
I don't read the chat very well, but I was just scanning up. I was looking at what Brad put there. The revenue margin of taking that second side job isn't anywhere close to the main job and may actually be less than paying the guy to mow the lawn. So, it's a mathematical equation, right? And frankly, I kept my own lawn because I liked it. I needed to relax, and I'm hyperactive, and I got to do something physical, right? I got to actually do something. I actually like physical work. So, yeah, I think it's a mathematical thing. I do think it can be damaging to take a lot of side hustles. I hear it on the internet a lot, and it's frankly, I think it's people who have never done it, right? But they say that you should have multiple streams of passive income. I mean, it sounds great, but if you're dividing your intensity 15 different ways, you're not doing the one thing that you could be the best at. So you want to, be like I don't know, maybe that's enough said on that. But the fact is, I think we need to concentrate and do what we do best. That's what the world will pay for. That's what will make us feel better. That's where we can deliver the most value to the world. And if you don't deliver value to the world, if you're only making money, it'll be fine when you're 25 or 30 years old because you're trying to build a household. It won't be fine when you're 55, 60 and you're looking for meaning and purpose in your life. You'll feel hollow. So we really do want to find work that is meaningful and purposeful. And it can take time to work into that, but I think it's important. It's more important than the money.
Yeah. Do you have any tips for, let's see, Madeline's asking, any help for avoiding getting hyper-focused at work?
Yeah, so I would divide it, and this might be a way for someone, a clue to start looking, to figure out this problem. I think hyper-focus is different than being in the zone, so to speak, right? If you were a basketball player and you were in the zone, you'd be great. You'd be doing a fantastic job because your whole being is focused on that one thing. That's a good place to be. Hyper-focus is more of a, don't bother me, right? I'm just white knuckling it here. I'm going to get this done. I don't want any distractions. I don't want any noise, any of that kind of stuff. And the sense of time disappears. Time blindness is a big part of this. So I would differentiate between those two things. I don't know how you pull yourself out of it. If you're in a zone, you really don't want to pull yourself out of it because you're really accomplishing something and you feel good about it.
Madeline says she forgets to eat lunch, though.
Yeah.
She forgets to take care of her basic needs.
Exactly. And so that would be a place where I would say, this is a technique I've used myself, mainly to keep myself from being off track and distracted, but I think it might work in this case too. I set a timer for like 25 minutes and I get oppositional. So I don't want that timer to be saying, stop this and do that. The timer simply says, wake up, be here now, pay attention. Are you doing what you said you're going to be doing? And if not, why not? And that's 25 minutes. And then I spend maybe 2 minutes writing a couple sentences of what I did in the last 25 minutes. So I have a log. I love keeping a log of things. And then I just go right back into it. It doesn't break my concentration. It's very short. And that might be a way to break it because you're waking up, you're being here now. You say, oh, I'm here, I'm doing this. Oh, but I'm hungry. And you're noticing things. So you're waking up in a way every 25 minutes, every half hour. I still do it once in a while if I'm struggling with focus and such. Because with ADHD, we can go off track for hours, if not days. If you set that timer, you're never going to be off track for more than a half an hour before your mind comes back and says, okay, I see I'm off track. Do I want to stay off track or do I want to get back?
Yeah,
that's the only choice. I think it's, for a lot of us, it would not be good for that timer to be saying, you have to stop that now and you have to start this other thing. That may not work.
Great, terrific. So thank you guys all so much for those great questions. And Rick, I'd like to give you an opportunity to talk to us a little bit about what you do and what you offer. So in case people are looking for some support in this area, which I know a lot of people are, they know where to go.
Perfect, thank you. Marketing people tell me, don't mention the price until the end. And I'm thinking, well, that's the elephant in the room. When I'm listening to someone, I can't hear anything until they tell me. I want the bottom line first, and then I can listen to the rest. So our program's basically about $20 a month, depending on which one you choose, but it's depends how many months you choose to do it. So it's about $20 a month. And we have accountability sessions once a week, which we talked about in here, where you basically say what you're going to do to a group of people. And then right after that, we have a body double session. It's connected to it. So we just move right into working at our desk or, wherever it doesn't have to be at the desk. So we do that. We have a sleep group. Sleep is really important. If there was one thing besides the diagnosis, medication, and all that kind of stuff that I'd say people need to get under control, is sleep. 2 nights of sleep deprivation and the ADHD symptoms go off the rails, right? They did a study with college students a long time ago, and they were more sleep deprived, but they had sleep deprived college students, the control group, and drunk students. Guess who did the worst, right? Sleep deprived is worse than being drunk. So, and yet you don't know it when you're in it. You think you're doing okay, and you aren't.
Yeah.
So we have a sleep group that talks about those kind of issues. We have what my team tells me I have to rename, but I call it the self-help book club, right? We did the Radical Guide to Women with ADHD last time, and this time we're doing Atomic Habits with James Clear. Falling Through the Ceiling is coming up soon. And, you know, we just have a list of them. It takes about 6 weeks to go through a book. And it's all designed to be community, right? Academic knowledge is not our problem, right? It's community. So, you know, you're in there, you're interacting with people. We have a meditation group, which is really small. I'm like 1 out of 5 people that shows up to it. So it's really small. But I would have thought I'd be the last person in the world to want to meditate. You know, I can't sit still very long, but I really like it. Actually, it happens at 9 o'clock, which is, I'm well into my day by 9 o'clock, and it's a little pause for me, and I actually really like it, and I like the people that show up to it. We have something called Conversations with Melissa, and some of you, I know Suzanne, you know Melissa. Melissa used to be with ADDA, now she's with Chad. We didn't poach her, I promise, but she works with us, and she does a bunch of things, and she's great. So she leads something called Conversations with Melissa, where we have a different expert that comes in every week and talks about whatever it is that they do. And Success Clinic, which is just your run-of-the-mill support group, basically, but it's, you know, just like you would find at Chad or ADDA. And then we have those are weekly things. Then we have our basic classes, which are, they're evolving, but we have one on home ownership because that's my big thing, right? The difference between homeowners and renters is just staggering. It's almost criminal. So we really want to figure out how to get onto that side of this thing. And then I have an entrepreneurs class, which I also is my wheelhouse. I like it. We have one for real world budgeting and personal finance. These are all targeted toward ADHD, neurodiversities and such.
That's so great. It's so great because people always ask us, you know, when we run our support groups, where can I go to find out, you know, about how to manage my finances, because it's so extra challenging with ADHD, and you are the go-to for that. So I'm so grateful that you were here tonight and you spent some extra time taking all of our questions. Thank you so much, Rick.
No, it's been fun. And you know, I love doing this stuff. Otherwise, I'd retire. I love it. Yeah.
It's fantastic. I am so grateful to everybody for being here tonight. I'm going to stick around. Usually we wrap this up and end it, but tonight I'm going to stick around after we say goodbye to Rick and just answer any questions that anybody has about Chad, or if anybody needs any support tonight, you can stick around afterwards as well.
And I just leave you with just one thought.
Sure. Yeah.
In your work, it's so important that when we think better, when we feel better, we're going to do better. In our work, we want to strive to not be the thank God it's Friday person. We want to be the thank God it's Monday person. Thank God I get to go back and do what I love. Doesn't mean we're going to work 24/7. That's not what I'm saying. But we need to enjoy. What a waste of life to spend 8 hours a day for 40 years doing something you don't like. Use your ADHD to creatively design your own life and find work that really means something to you. That's one of the big problems with executive function. If we don't like it, we're not doing it. Right? Not going to happen. But the things we're passionate about, team of horses can't keep us away from it. So, all right, I will let you guys go. It's been fun.
Thank you so much, Rick. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Appreciate this whole group. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.